with a scholarship that have stayed close to the organization, I think would say that they have benefited tremendously from that association, and we hope that that is true for each of you. This is a memorial program, and the idea came from a gentleman by the name of Kevin Housley, who went to school with Melinda and I at Texas State, was one of my closest friends when we were in school. We remained close. He was the best man at my wedding, and the kind of civic leader that I believe represents a model for what we should all aspire to be. He did, not only was he successful business professional with his own company, he served on the school board in his local school district. He was a civic leader on 5 different philanthropic organizations, active in his church community. Ultimately decided to run for state representative, and in maybe what was a fortunate turn of events, lost his race for the state house and was subsequently diagnosed with brain cancer. He survived for about another year and a half before passing away in 2008. And so we had the choice of naming another scholarship. We have a number of memorial scholarships at Stellus, but Melinda and I felt that was probably an insufficient recognition for the impact that Kevin had had on our lives. And so the idea of the Housley Principled Leadership Program was born. And it's been a tremendous honor over that period of time to recognize his impact and the model that he represents as a person of consequence in his community. So we think it's important that you understand where the motivation for this program comes from and why we do what we do. And it is really an effort to both honor and remember Kevin's legacy. I'll share this with you, and I'm sure, Melinda, you can share this via email as well. When I say stay close to Stellus, that's pretty easy to do. It's also not too hard to stay close to me personally. I dox myself pretty regularly, not too hard to find, and invite you to connect with me in any of these different ways. If you want to just take a shot of that, or we'll get it to you in an email form. So I want to tell you a little bit about the Housley Principled Leadership Program, because we're going to spend 4 hours together over the course of the next month. And the course itself is a 45-hour course. So what we're doing is really cherry picking a sampling of the content and the messaging that we cover in the course. The idea here is to introduce each of you to the program and just give you a taste of the type of things that we cover in the full course. But with less than 10% of the time that we typically dedicate to the program, obviously we're just going to be skimming the surface. The course itself, I like to say it's broken down into 3 parts. About the first third of the course is an exploration of yourself. It's all about self-awareness. Where do you come from? What are your background influences? What are your core values? Why do you believe the things you believe? Ultimately, trying to get people to interrogate their own history and their own personality, and develop a deeper understanding of why they are who they are and how they became who they have become. That's a foundational component of leadership, right? To know yourself. We then transition in the middle part of the course to leadership fundamentals, leadership frameworks, tools, how to lead individuals, how to lead organizations. That's the nuts and bolts of the work of leadership. And we equip the participants in the program with all of the hard skills that they need to go and do the work of leadership. And then we leave about a month at the end of the semester for what I think is probably the most interesting and enjoyable aspect of the course. We really just sit back and say, okay, so what? You're now fully self-aware and you now have all the tools that you need to be wildly successful as a leader, but what are you going to do with the rest of your life? And we have just phenomenal conversations about goals and happiness and relationships and the role of money, the impact of the culture on our own expectations for what life is supposed to be like. We talk about the role of service. We talk about right, all of these big questions that we all grapple with, and the objective there is not to answer those questions, but to teach people how to continue to reevaluate where they are on their path and make sure that they're heading in the right direction. Right? We say that effective leaders are reflective leaders, and those that really take control of their trajectory in life are the ones that ultimately are the most successful and happiest. So that is an overview of the course. When we talk about leadership, it's important to start off with some definitions, because we tend to use leadership interchangeably with management from time to time, and it is a different skill, right? And when I think about management is about organizing and doing the work, right? It's about putting systems and processes in place and making sure that people are effective at doing the work of the organization. Where leadership exists at a higher level, right? It's really about making sure the organization is moving in the right direction. The analogy that we use in class is, if the manager, if we're trying to get a team of people through the forest, the manager's down organizing people to chop down bushes and plow trails and make sure that we can make our way through the woods, where the leader's the one that climbs up in a tree and makes sure that we're actually heading in the right direction. But ultimately, when we talk about leadership, it really boils down to the ability to influence others. So, if you're a leader with no followers, if you're calling yourself a leader, but you actually have no influence, and you can't motivate and inspire and push people in the right direction, then you're not doing it right. And ultimately, the common trait that successful leaders share, one is they have influence, and two, at their core is a character, right, and a set of values that they live and that they communicate through both their words and their actions. When students ask me, gosh, what's the real secret to success? What do I have to do to make sure that I can be successful? I always respond, it is much less about what you know. It's much less about the particular skills or the particular industry you work in. If you want to answer this question of success, you need to work on character and define what that means to you, and continue to etch that character into your personality. Leaders control tomorrow. Right? Leaders are concerned about today, but leaders really live in the future. Right? Their orientation is in the future. They're looking around the bend at what's coming next and preparing people and organizations for what the future looks like. So leaders are very future-oriented people. They control tomorrow. And ultimately, when I talk about my friend Kevin Housley and the work that he did and the impact that he had in his community, I say he was a person of consequence, right? He mattered in his community, and the community would have suffered without his work and his leadership. And ultimately, that's my great hope for all of the people that go through the Housley Principled Leadership Program, is that they'll come away with a much greater understanding of themselves, and that they will make a commitment to becoming a person of consequence and serving something greater than themselves and making an impact in their community. So before we can do that and dive into this task of becoming a leader, we have to meet the prerequisite of knowing ourselves. So I'd like to just open up the floor for those of you who can take yourself off mute and answer what are those influencing factors in life that affect who you are and how you lead. And I'll give you an example right off the bat just to get things started. Gender is an influencing factor, right? The way that you were raised, the way that you were treated, depending on whether you were a male or a female as you were growing up, is an influence and a factor that affects who you are and how you lead. What other factors might influence who you are?
I think you make a great point about environment in general. So I think specifically about the examples I've seen growing up and how I've seen leaders in my own community and my own upbringing, I think affects how I see and I lead, and just kind of how I live day to day based off of that.
But what are those environmental factors that you're referring to?
I think there's financial, and so, status of, did I grow up in a high earning income family, or was it a low income, and like what kind of opportunities did that bring?
Sure.
Just as one example.
Yeah, I mean, socioeconomic status is going to have a profound impact on how you see the world and who you are. What else?
I'd say religion and spirituality. So, one, because of the philosophy that comes with that, and then also because of the community that often comes with that. And there's going to be different cultural norms that come along with those communities.
Yeah. So one is there any religion in the household and the community you were raised? And if yes, then what is the nature of that religion, and what are the particular teachings and catechisms that you take away from it? Hugely influential.
Personally, I think the opportunity to lead, if you've been given the opportunity to kind of grow those skills from a young age, or just opportunity with work and stuff, makes an impact.
Yeah.
I think both race and gender are, in different ways, not to equalize them, but similarly affect not just your self-perception, but whether or not people are going to expect you to lead. Like men are inherently just expected to lead more than women. And I think that's a really important distinction, that it's not just like how it affects my identity as a person, but what other people are going to expect from me and then how they treat me as a result. And often that, without realizing it, like it translates to more opportunities for some people and less opportunities for other people.
Sure. Race, ethnicity, gender, it's kind of almost impossible to imagine how you can disentangle those things from, you know, someone's background and nature of who they are.
Another big one is your participation in outside organizations or groups. You know, I know from my children, you know, playing competitive sports definitely has made them who they are. For me, I was a dancer. I think when you have to put time and energy into something to perfect it, I think that has a lot to do with the way you basically are in the world when you're no longer in those organizations.
Yep. Hobbies, interests, teams, organizations. Sure. What else?
Well, one we forgot is family. Nowadays, we have families that are not, I say, full with mom and dad, and this is changing where you have composed family, recomposed families, and all this stuff, or you don't have the dad or the mom, and all those affects how we see the world and how we affect it.
Sure. I mean, family obviously hugely influential in the way that family interacts with one another. You know, you can wrap a whole bunch of things into family, like parenting style. You know, did you have very strict, overbearing helicopter parents, or did you have parents that had, you know, more of a loose, let them make their own mistakes parenting style? That has an impact on who you are and how you see the world. Your parents' careers have an impact on you. I mean, the difference between the child of a professional couple that you know, speaks to children in a very adult-like fashion versus the, you know, the parents of a child that don't really have grow up in a professional household. Those are two completely different upbringings that absolutely affect who you are and how you lead.
I think what we watch and what we read.
Yeah. The culture itself, right? I mean, and the way we consume the culture has a big impact on not only how we see ourselves, but our expectations of what life is supposed to be like. Right? And that has a profound impact on us. Other ideas? I mean, y'all hit the big ones. I mean, I look at, just because I grew up in a fairly rural community, that difference between a rural upbringing versus a suburban upbringing versus an urban upbringing. Those are three completely different environments in which you're going to spend your formative years. Education, language, you know, country of origin, key childhood events, right? I mean, did you have, you know, something happen in your childhood that shapes you and has had a profound impact on you, both positive or potentially traumatic? You know, those are things to really understand. I see birth order influences in my own children, and particularly in the way they lead. That seems to be, you know, they fit perfectly into the stereotype of, you know, what a first child personality type is, what the baby's personality type is, and the middle child. So I'm not an expert on that particular topic, but if you believe that birth order has an impact on you, you can probably see it play out in other people. So these are all those things, right? You checklist. I mean, we can go down this list for yourself and say, are you male or female? What's your ethnicity? Did you grow up in an urban environment or a rural environment? What kind of socioeconomic status? What was your home life like? What was your parents' style in raising you? Did you have opportunities for enrichment and education? What kind of television programs did you watch at home? What kind of books were in your household? Were there no books in your household? These are things for you to explore for yourself as you determine what it is that goes into the pot, that all the ingredients in the gumbo that is you. And most of us, we intuit these things, but we haven't fully explored how they affect us. We grow up with these influences, and we say, I'm a Methodist. Okay, why are you a Methodist? Well, because my parents were Methodist. Fine. Or I'm a Republican. Great. Why are you a Republican? Well, my parents were a Republican. As an adult, it's up to you to really understand the environment in which you were raised, the influences that have turned you into the person you are, and fully interrogate them and understand how those influences have affected who you are and how you lead. Other ideas on this question? So some of you may actually be able to cheat on this answer, but this is a quote by one of my favorite philosophers: "The roots of my raising run deep." Anybody know who said that? Famous 20th century American philosopher named Merle Haggard. And that quote, to me, really represents what we're talking about. The roots of your raising run deep. I'm going to give you my confession and a little story about what I consider some of those influences as a way of providing an example of how this might go for yourself. Okay. So first off, I have to confess that I'm a middle class white kid from a suburb of Houston. I had the terrible misfortune of having two parents that love me very much, that are still married after 56 years, with all of the resources and extended family love and support that anyone could ever imagine. It's a real burden and a real struggle that I've had to overcome. I like to think it's a real, pull yourself up by your own bootstraps kind of story. In reality, I am where I am in large part because of the upbringing that I had and the environment in which I was raised and the resources that were available to me. If you got Melinda, or Rose or Tebow or Courtney alone and said, "Tell me about Bill," what I would hope they would say is, Bill has an incredible work ethic, that as a leader, he has very high expectations and standards of performance, that he doesn't suffer fools gladly. If you're going to challenge him on a topic, you better have your shit together. However, he's fun and funny and uses humor in his leadership. He's motivated by personal growth, and he's always exploring. There's always new ideas. There's always new things to go do. Always something, just over the horizon that he's chasing. That's what I hope the people that know me best would articulate as the most marked characteristics of my personality. And if that's true, then it's a reasonable question to say, where did those things come from? Right? High standards of performance, work ethic, more of an adventurous and a fun spirit, but extremely focused on accountability and responsibility. And I think that I can dissect that pretty easily without going beyond my family. My grandfathers, my maternal grandfather was a dairy farmer. That's where I grew up. If you know anything about dairy farming, I mean, the one thing everybody knows about dairy farming is you have to wake up really early in the morning, and cows don't take a day off. So you milk the cows twice a day, every day, 7 days a week, 365 days a year. It's work. My paternal grandfather was a welder, and he was a tradesman, built many of the big skyscrapers in downtown Houston, worked a full shift, but then had his own welding shop where he took in work on the side. So he essentially had 2 full-time jobs. He would do a 6 to 2 shift in his trade position, and then he would go to his shop and work from 2 until past dinner, and then all day on Saturdays. So, you're growing up, and 2 of the most influential men in your life are doing 2 of the hardest jobs imaginable. It's not difficult to understand where an attitude about work and an ethic about work is going to seep into your system. My grandmothers, they were born 1912 and 1918, and very unusually for women in that era, both of my grandmothers graduated from college. And my maternal grandmother went on to teach 2nd grade for 30 years in the school district I went. My mother taught 1st grade in the same school district. I had the great pleasure of spending my first 2 years in school with my mom and my grandma right across the hall. So not only can you not misbehave, the expectations of performance in the classroom were extraordinarily high. It would have been, I'm sure, a great embarrassment to my grandmother if I was not at the top of the class. And so if you think, where does that focus on academic excellence and high standards of performance come from? I view the gift that I received from my grandmothers as a key to that. And then my father, he never went to college, graduated high school and started working. And the thing that I took away from him is this focus on responsibility, reliability, accountability. His real strength as a person is he is reliable, right? That man never, ever, ever said he was going to do something that he didn't follow through on do. When I was, younger and had chores, if I didn't do it exactly the way that it was supposed to be done, then I got invited to do it again. And I took that responsibility and reliability ethic away from him. And, lest you think that it's all about work and school and responsibility, I could introduce you to my mother, and you'd find out that there's also a whole lot of fun and adventure in my background as well, because she's kind of a nut and was a school teacher, but she was the school teacher that, the week after school let out, she threw all the kids in the station wagon and took off across the country. And we would spend every summer 6 weeks, 8 weeks, 10 weeks driving all over the country, Canada, Alaska, camping every night, and just, living this very adventurous and free-spirited life. As an adult, she confessed to me that when I was 18 months old, she almost left home to join the Merchant Marines. And my father, being the one that had more sense in the family, said, well, that's great. Just recognize that you can't come home after that. And so she changed her mind and decided not to, run off and join the circus, and continued to stay home and raise me. And I'm certainly thankful for that. So I offer that as an example of the kind of exploration that you can do for yourself. I used my grandparents and my parents, but that may not be true for you. Your influences may come from Little League coaches or Sunday school teachers. They may come from other members of the community. They may come from your friends as you were growing up. It's not intended to just be family oriented. You need to ask yourself in this exploration of influences what it is that drove you to become the person that you are. Any reactions to this story or the idea of self-exploration and an understanding of your background and influences?
I just in general like what you have on the slide to kind of capture everything you said, that most effective leaders are reflective, just because I think that implies a certain level of humility in leadership, which I think is important for anybody, no matter your kind of upbringing or leadership style.
Yeah. Other thoughts?
I think I'm realizing it's easy to think of my own upbringing and just be like, well, yeah, then I went to church, then I went to school. Yeah, my mom did this for a living. And it doesn't feel interesting or unique or worthwhile. Not like I'm, saying I had a horrible childhood. It just doesn't feel like the makings of a great leader until I listened to your story. And then it's almost just the way that you narrate your story and the way that you if you can remove yourself and look at it from an outside perspective, like how someone else would view your story. Because there are pieces of your story that are pretty average, like Houston is, cool, but it's not anything special. But in the way that you piece it together, it feels special and it feels like the makings of a great background. So I think that's helpful in looking at my own story, to remember that to someone else it's interesting and I can find it interesting again with an extra look.
Yeah, well, we're all unique, right? Every pot of gumbo is different. I mean, that's the great thing about gumbo, is even if you're using the same recipe, it's never the same twice. And we all have a little bit different flavor. Even if I went to 10 of my closest friends that I grew up with, their stories are going to be different. Even though we have huge overlaps in our backgrounds and influences, they're not the same. right? They didn't have the exact same upbringing and the exact same influences, even though we grew up in the same community.
Well, isn't this being a leader? What I'm trying to say is, we all have a different story. However, we all have parts that are similar one to each other. So the whole thing of my idea of being a leader is someone that, okay, has done the work, understand who he is, and is strong and will not break down when there are difficulties, and is there for other people that follow him, understand them, and are able to pick them up and to reach and go toward the goal. So that's, we're special, but not special at the same time.
The thing that I like you said, Thibaut, is that the leader understands them, right? So, today we're talking about understanding ourselves and what makes us unique. That is a prerequisite, but insufficient for leadership, right? We have to understand ourselves. But then the next step is understanding that everyone else has a story, and their story is different from ours. By nature, it must be different from ours. And you don't have to be a PhD in psychology to think deeply about other people and their background and their influences and why they believe the things that they believe, and have a more empathetic approach to leadership, right? That celebrates the fact that everyone has their own story and that other people don't view the world the way that you do. I mean, how many times have you looked at a situation or looked at a problem with 3 friends, and all 4 of you have a different idea about what to do? It's because we all view the world through our own lens, and that's the lens of our upbringing and the influences that have created us. So, first step, knowing yourself, knowing your story. Second step, recognizing that everyone else has a story and that theirs is different, and they may view the world a little bit differently than we do, and that may cause them to behave in ways that are different than we do. Ultimately, this comes down to values. I'd invite you to think about the people in your life that you have an affinity for. I'm sure that each of you can probably name 2 or 3 people that you would consider your closest friends that you just click with. You've got a bond that may on the surface appear a little inexplicable, but if you think about those individuals, take a minute and just give some thought to what are those personality characteristics, what are those traits about those people that you have an affinity for that you admire most. What are the things about other people that you admire most? I mean, I admire people that have a strong work ethic. I admire people that strive for excellence in whatever they do, right? Whether they want to be excellent in business, or they want to be an excellent writer, or they want to be an excellent volleyball player. The what doesn't matter to me, but I really value and appreciate people that strive for excellence in the things that they do. I love people that are humble and humorous, right? These are just some examples of the things that I I look at, and when someone presents themselves to me and they possess some or all of these traits, it's very likely that I'm going to have a natural attraction and affinity to that person. What are those things for you? Any ideas?
One of mine that doesn't get mentioned a lot, but just is so important to me is optimism.
Mm-hmm.
I really have a hard time with negative people. Everybody has stuff, right? We just talked about that. So I'm really drawn to optimistic people. Glass half empty people are just, they weigh on me very heavily.
Yeah. Positivity is just one of those traits that it doesn't take very long to figure out that someone is bringing that sunshine, or they're kind of the Charlie Brown character with the cloud following them around all the time.
I really value people who can see in like shades of gray instead of just black and white. And that kind of goes back to what you were saying about people of different backgrounds. Like, as someone who's been on many sides like of the political spectrum, like I can see how people could believe like a lot of different things. And I think that I really admire people who can be empathetic towards people who they might not necessarily agree with.
Yeah, or that just understand nuance.
Mm-hmm.
I think particularly when we're talking about politics, we have a tendency to dumb things down to yes, no, black, white, stop, go, when the world is much more complicated than that, and it requires people that appreciate shades of gray or the nuances associated with any given particular question.
Michelle put in the chat box consistency.
Mm-hmm. What does that mean, consistency?
When I look at leaders who are consistent, like they know who they are, they know what they're doing, they stick to that path. That's just super appealing to me because I'm not always that way. And so I want to learn from that. I have so many ideas and so many variations to my personality that it's hard for me to find that one to stick to a path.
Mm-hmm.
And so I appreciate that when I see it.
Yeah, consistency is important, particularly when things go bad. Right, that's when we see the real mettle of a leader. Is when things are going well, everyone's happy, everyone likes you, you're feeling good. It's how you behave when the shit hits the fan that can really determine how effective you are as a leader. And I find that consistency comes from people that return to core values and core principles. So it's not that I have these values and core principles that are really convenient when things are good and I throw them out the second that something becomes challenging. People that have the ability to consistently return to core values and core principles, regardless of the circumstances they're dealing with, are the ones that are most admired. Other thoughts?
Kind of going off what Rose said, very similar to being able to see gray in things. I'm really drawn to empathy, and any person just being able to meet somebody right where they're at. I think it's important to set a bar and try to pull people higher, but really important to be able to understand where they're coming from and to meet them at that level as well.
Yeah.
And words that go with that, I think, are like kindness and compassion. Those are really important words to me as well. And I think it's right in the same vein as that.
One for me is like grit and perseverance. So kind of like what you were saying, Bill, with when things get tough and you have to keep going and it's just not, okay, I give up, I'm not doing anything. And like that's part of like a big part of the work ethic is you know, the first try is not always going to be the correct way. So grit and perseverance for me.
Yeah, I love the word grit. So this is a homework assignment. I'd like for you to think about these people that you have a natural affinity for. And if it's helpful, you can also think about the opposite, right? I'm sure you have all met people in your lives that just turned you off. And maybe you didn't recognize what it was about them that turned you off immediately, but you had a visceral negative reaction. And so this is a way to try to explore what that reaction is based upon. But in a positive sense, create a list for yourself. 5 character traits, 5 personality traits. If you want to go to 10, go to 10. And then compare that list to the people that are closest to you in your life, your nearest and dearest friends. And, see how they stack up, right? And I think what you'll find is a fairly high degree of correlation between these characteristics you admire and the people that you have a natural affinity for. And it's pretty easy to kind of look at that list of characteristics and do the antonym and say, if someone showed up at my doorstep with 8 of 10, the opposite of these things, I probably am not going to be best friends for life. I found this exercise to be extremely valuable in my relationship with other people, because I asked them to go through it. I developed my list and I beat it up and I convinced myself that it was the exact right list that I evaluated people against. And then I asked my business partner to do the same. And his list was so completely different than mine that it immediately illuminated all of these business problems and differences that we had. Right? My list is like, excellence and work ethic and, reliability. And his was, loyalty, capacity to love, all these things. And it immediately allowed us to recognize like why I wanted to fire someone for poor performance, and he would never agree to fire him because he loved them and they were loyal, even if they might be kind of worthless at their job. But going through the exercise allowed us to have a conversation about how we see the world differently, what characteristics we admire in other people, and allowed us to have a healthier dialogue about how we were going to solve these problems and make decisions together. So I think for you, knowing what it is that you value in other people, once we understand that, it's not too great a leap to say, if these are things I value, then they might also be an articulation of my values. And so this is a first step in defining for yourself, what are your values? And as a leader, we're going to fall back on those values time and time again. So do that for yourself. I don't expect that the first 10 words that you write down are necessarily going to be the ones that you finish with. I'll tell you, it took me a couple of months and a few iterations of the list to narrow down, just the right words that I use to define the things that I value.
Can I add something? I would just like to say that this exercise has also helped me become the person that I want to be. By identifying these character traits that you admire in other people, it allows you to really reflect on yourself as well. Just like Michelle said, is one of the things that she admires is something that she doesn't do well and that she wishes she would. And so for me, this list is honestly something that's taped to my notebook, and I look at it every day and I remind myself, okay, you know, today I want to work hard, today I want to be really positive. And it just reminds me of when I am being negative, you got to step back and come back to your values and the things that you admire in other people and hold yourself accountable for those things.
Yeah. We also introduced the concept of this list of values early in the semester. Really, it's the second week of the class. And then when we come back full circle at the end of the semester and are talking about life, we go back to this list of values when thinking about selection of a life partner. It's one thing to kind of scan the universe for friends. It's another thing to scan the universe for, you know, someone that you plan to share your life with. And, you know, if you're starting off at, you know, anything less than a 6 out of 10, you know, you might be setting yourself up for a rocky road. So just recognizing that, you know, these character traits are valuable to you is an important part of knowing yourself.
Hey, Bill, I have a question about this can there be things that happen in your life, good or bad, but significant, that can change your list over time? Or do you feel it's something that is consistent all the time?
I sure hope that we change. You know, if not, then what is this idea of personal development all about? It is, you know, core values are probably not going to change. You know, there are certain aspects of your personality that are so deeply ingrained that dynamite's not going to remove them. But we are shaped by our experiences. And as we live, we gain new experiences and new perspectives, and that very easily could shift the things we value. You know, significant life events change your values. I sold a business last year, you know, life-changing transaction. Did it change my attitude about work ethic and excellence? No. But has it changed my perspective on many other aspects of life? Absolutely. And, you know, I think we all grow and develop. One of the things that is universally true, if you ask 30-year-olds to comment on their 20-year-old self, what do 30-year-olds say?
You're an idiot.
Exactly. What a dumbass I was when I was 20, right? Guess what 80-year-olds say about their 70-year-old self? Tebow?
You're an idiot.
Exactly, right? We think that at some point, you know, in life, we kind of stop and, you know, we are who we are. And in some ways that is true, but we are a collection of our experiences and a product of them. And so it is absolutely true that 80-year-olds look at their 70-year-old self and go, boy, what a moron I was. So hopefully it never stops. And part of making sure it doesn't stop is reflecting, continuing to ask yourself these questions and reflecting on who you are and what it is that has made you the way you are. So some takeaways from today. I define leadership as influence. Right? If you're not influencing people, if you're not shaping the future, then you're not really leading. Leaders come in all shapes and sizes. There's, you know, this idea of the natural born leader is a bit of a fallacy. Leadership is a skill set, right? And it's a skill and a set of tools that can be applied by anybody, which means you can become a leader with practice and education. The most effective leaders are reflective leaders. That was a quote on the previous slide. Reflection is a habit. And, you know, I personally spend time on Sunday evenings, dedicated time thinking about how did last week go? What did I accomplish? You know, what did I fail to accomplish? How did I do in my relationships? You know, similar to Courtney, am I living up to my own values and expectations? And then planning for the week ahead. So it's both a reflection and a plan. Recognize our own story is important, but then recognizing that everyone else has a story and may view the world a little differently. I see this happen all the time, particularly cross-generational. You know, there seems to be this attitude in, you know, my generation that, you know, the younger generations, you know, are all problematic, right? They're entitled and they're spoiled and they, you know, lack work ethic. And I would just point you to Aristotle, who, you know, like 5,000 years ago was saying the exact same thing about the youth of his day. So not necessarily a new story. Ultimately, this idea of leadership and my hope for each of you is that you will elect to assume the responsibilities of leadership and become a person of consequence. So I appreciate y'all taking time on a Friday during the summer to join us and to invest in yourself.
Getting a little bit of a spotty thing from you.
Working with the okay. Zoom is not quite the same as being in person, but it's certainly, we've learned over the last year how to make this medium work for us. So thank you again. I look forward to continuing the conversation over the next 3 weeks. We've got some great topics that I think you'll enjoy and appreciate to discuss.
Everybody will get an email. We do have a little bit of pre-work for the next session. Not a lot, but just expect some things to read before we meet again next Friday.
Thank you all.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.